So, for today's video, we are going to be talking about all the books that I read during the month of June. I have to be honest with you, I feel like I didn't read that many books during the month of June, but I looked over it and it turns out that I actually did read 5 books, which isn't too bad for me. It's not amazing by any means, but it isn't too bad for me. I am also in the middle of one book, which I will show you at the very end, so it doesn't really count, but I'm going to show it to you anyway because I'm in the middle of it. So I'm going to start with the 3 fiction books that I read during June, and then I will talk about the 2 non-fiction books that I read during June, and then at the very end I'll show you the book that I'm currently reading as well. And before I do that, I just wanted to say that I'm filming another video in my garden. As you can tell, I got quite a few responses from previous videos that I filmed in the garden to say how pretty it was, so I thought let's do another one in the garden. So let's do the book wrap up, shall we? So first of all, I read Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. I'm just going to read you this little bit in the blurb. Meet Queenie, journalist, catastrophist, expressive, aggressive, loved, lonely, enough. And I think that actually sums up the character of Queenie and this book pretty well. So Queenie is a black woman living in London in the UK. It's contemporary. It is about her struggles to come to terms with some trauma that she had in her childhood, to come to terms with her situation with her partner, and just basically to kind of come to terms with being herself and finding herself, and the situation that is the case for all black people living in the UK or United States or Australia or anywhere else for that matter, whereby they live with constant racism that is very sort of hidden but not hidden and underhanded, and the sort of racism that people get away with because they claim they're not racist because they know a black person, or they give to a charity that, like World Vision, that helps people in Africa, or their colleague is black, or something like that, where they feel like they can get away with comments and criticism and jokes and things that are very thinly veiled racist things, but because they're thinly veiled, they think it's just the other person's problem, that they're not they can't take a joke or whatever it might be. So it's a really great book from that point of view. It actually gives a really interesting take on dealing with everyday racism and the sort of racism that isn't acknowledged as racist in our society. So that was really interesting. Very upsetting, but very interesting. It's just really well written as well. I think that it's fantastic, basically. I really enjoyed reading this book. It is the sort of hard-hitting contemporary fiction that I really like, whereby it seems like it's going to be sort of just chick lit, which is very often used as a derogatory term for this kind of fiction, which is fiction that is contemporary. It's about a woman and her struggles, but there's a lot more to it than that. So I highly recommend it if that's the kind of thing that you enjoy. Like I said, it's really well written. I think that the character of Queenie is really well done. She's very raw and very believable, very in your face, definitely a catastrophist, but that's not to say that the things that she's going through, the things that she's gone through, and just, like I said, the everyday racism that happens to her is really, it's a big thing and it's not to be ignored. So she is a catastrophist, she makes a big deal out of stuff, but at the same time, what she's going through is not necessarily a small thing. So yeah, I find that a really interesting thing. That is also often an accusation that is levelled at women when women are making a complaint about the things that are said and done to them and about them, that they are catastrophizing the situation, or that they don't have a sense of humour, or that the other person didn't mean it like that, so therefore it's their responsibility to shoulder that and not take it personally. So Queenie, being a black woman, goes through that from both sides, from being a woman and from being black. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a picnic to read, but it was very enjoyable. So definitely recommend this book. by Candace Carty-Williams. Next up we have Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. I feel like I've talked about this book a lot on my channel recently, partly because I actually did read it recently in June, and partly because it just kind of has fitted a few different questions that I've been doing as part of tags and stuff like that. So anyway, this is the second book in the duology. The first one is Skyward and the second one is Starsight. I'm not going to tell you a huge amount about this book because I don't want to have any spoilers if you haven't read the duology. If you like young adult science fiction, I definitely recommend it. I think that he is an amazing author. I really enjoyed this book. I actually enjoyed this book slightly more than I enjoyed Skyward, but only by a small amount, and not to say that Skyward wasn't amazing, because it was, but there was just something in Starsight that I found a bit more interesting. He develops the universe which it's set in a bit more. He adds a new layer of nuance and storyline to what we had in Skyward, which I thought was really great. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. Some people, I think I've heard people say that the ending was a bit disappointing for them, and I can definitely see why, although it didn't bother me. I am kind of hoping that there's a third one coming, but if there isn't, I will still be okay with the ending. I don't mind endings that end not in an absolute way, if that makes any sense. Again, I don't want to do spoilers, so I'm just going to leave it there. But yeah, Skyward and Starsight I would definitely recommend if you are interested in young adult fantasy, sci-fi, or in fact sci-fi in general, or if you're thinking about trying out sci-fi. I think that it's a great introduction, so highly recommend. And the last fiction book that I read during the month of June was The City of Glass by Cassandra Clare. So as most of you probably know by now, my friend Connor over on Connor's Library Corner and I have been buddy reading the Mortal Instruments series. We are going to go now, we've read the first 3, and we're going to go now into the Infernal Devices and then come back to the Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare. So if you've been around for a while, you probably know my opinions about this book. I have talked quite a bit about this, and Connor and I did do a video where we discussed our opinions of the books, the first 3 Mortal Instruments series. I will link both my edited version of that conversation and his edited version of that conversation down below, so if you're interested in both or either, then please go ahead and check them out. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail again about the Mortal Instruments series or about my opinions about the Mortal Instruments series, what I've read so far. I think most of you probably know by now, but I will just say that Cassandra Clare writes young adult urban fantasy, and I am looking forward to reading the Infernal Devices, and I'm looking forward to reading more of the Mortal Instruments because I have heard that her writing improves markedly after the first 3 Mortal Instruments books. So I didn't love Cassandra Clare's writing. I don't mind the storyline, and I definitely think that she has potential, but I don't love her writing. I think it's quite immature, but there was apparently a 5-year gap between the City of Glass and the Infernal Devices trilogy and the next 3 books of the Mortal Instruments trilogy, which apparently she wrote book for book. So I'm very keen to read those books because I have heard from quite a number of people, both people that like Cassandra Clare and people that aren't huge fans of Cassandra Clare, that they are markedly better. So I'm hoping that is the case. But anyway, in either case, I'm not a huge fan of the first 3 Mortal Instruments series. They were okay. I didn't hate them. Middle of the road books really for me personally, so there you go. Okay, so now I want to move on to the 2 non-fiction books that I read in June, sorry. So for most of you, you probably are aware that I decided to go in the Blackout Buddy Read, which is a buddy read that was hosted by Shae over on Books with Shae, and the idea behind I should say that I will link her channel below. And the idea behind Shae's buddy read was to offer 2 books that she thought were a really great introduction to thinking about racism, predominantly in the United States, thinking about how it affects people of colour, specifically black people in the United States, thinking about the systemic racism that is alive and well in all Western first world countries, thinking about how we might educate ourselves, particularly white people, and also some of the history of racism within the United States and how the systemic nature of that racism has been propped up and created. So it was a really great buddy read. I wouldn't say I enjoyed the books because they were very confronting, but I definitely enjoyed the experience of learning more and educating myself more. There has been quite a bit of controversy over one of the books, which is White Fragility, because it is written by a woman called Carol D'Angelo, who is not black, and the controversy was about the fact that she was writing about racism as a white woman, and that it was felt by a lot of people that was not okay. I'm not going to talk hugely about that, and I've mentioned this in the past and said the same thing because I want to draw your attention to some of the conversation that Shae has had over on her channel about her choice of including this book in the Blackout Buddy Read and her reasons behind it. So I will link her channel in the description below, and I urge you to go ahead and watch her channel because I think that there's some great conversations around that. Also, Ashley from Bookish Realm has a great comment on that in her latest well, maybe not her latest, but one of her recent videos about her June wrap-up. So I will link that video in the description below as well, and I urge you to go ahead and look at that. Both of these women are Black American women, so I feel like their opinion on that particular controversy and why they think the books are still valid as part of this reading journey is quite relevant and useful. But I will just say that personally, as a white woman, I found that White Fragility was definitely a great place to start thinking about racism and about how racism is so systemic and so internalized and so inherent in our society. I consider myself a reasonably progressive, I guess, person, fighting for justice for various minorities and various situations has been something that I have done to a greater or lesser extent since I was sort of 18 years old. But even so, I definitely found that this book was very confronting. It really made me look at some of my own assumptions about the way that I think and the way that I conduct myself, and also some of my assumptions about racism in general and racism within our society. And actually, the book Queenie that I showed you a moment ago touched on quite a few interesting points about the book, about these topics as well, because Queenie deals with a lot of the sort of underhanded racism that comes along within a supposedly not racist society, which is what people claim is happening around the world these days. So White Fragility talks about that and talks about the fact that the conversation is so hard to have because there's a dichotomy within American society, but it can definitely be transferred to Australia and the United Kingdom, and I'm sure many other places as well, whereby we like to think that we're no longer a racist society, and so therefore being confronted with our own racism is very upsetting and very difficult to deal with, and so it means that white people shut down and don't then confront that racism, and basically nothing changes as a result. And also talking about the fact that because we benefit, whether or not we are explicitly racist ourselves, because we benefit from a society that is racist, we don't want to actually try too hard to change that in any way. And I found that really confronting, but it was also a really important thing to read and to think about and to listen to. Ashley did say in her video where she talked about this book that she thought that it wasn't written for her. It was written by a white person for a white person and trying to challenge some of the assumptions and some of the ingrained nature of our own racism and how to confront those racist thoughts. I wouldn't necessarily say that it was the best type of book. It's definitely intended as a beginning, as a way into the conversation. I wouldn't say that you should read that book and be done by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a good starting place and a good way to shake it up and a good way to really confront our own white fragility and a good way to make ourselves stop and really think about what we're actually experiencing and what we're seeing and what we're a part of and what we're benefiting from. I then went on to read White Rage by Carol Anderson, and this is a book that is written by a black person and it's a lot more hard-hitting than White Fragility, partly because I think that it's written by a person who is actually living the racism, but partly because there's a lot more information in that book about the history of racism in America and how that was deliberately set up by the founding fathers and by the states and by the politicians ongoing for the entirety of America's existence. And that was really, again, not easy to read. It wasn't enjoyable, but it was really, really interesting, really, really well written, really confronting. I really appreciated my experience reading that book. There's a lot of stuff in there that I didn't know, partly because I'm not American, so I'm not taught really much American history anyway, but partly because it's information that is very much hidden and glossed over and ignored, because who wants to admit that their society has been deliberately set up to be racist and that they benefit from that society? There were definitely things that were in both of the books that correspond to the situation in Australia. So Australia is definitely a racist society, and I'm sorry to anyone who is Australian who might like to think that we're not, because similar to America, a lot of people believe that racism is dead and gone, but it's not. And you can see that in the way that the First Nations people, Australian Aboriginal people, are treated, and it's a very similar history to the United States. So even if you are Australian and you are wanting to learn more about racism and the racist situation in Australia, I would definitely recommend reading White Rage. I think there's a lot of correlation. I did intend during the month of June to read another book that was much more specific to Australia, which I didn't grab and don't now remember what it's called. It was written by a woman called Larissa Brent, who I think is an absolutely amazing author. She writes both fiction and non-fiction. I've read both examples from her before and she's just incredible. She's also a lawyer and apparently really well known within sort of legal aid circles, so I definitely intend to read that book. I will put an image of it somewhere at some point, but it didn't happen in June. But I did read the other two as part of the buddy read, and I did join in on the live stream with Ashley, Shae, Bree from Bookish, Bree but Bookish, and Jasmine from, I want to say Books L'Amour, but I'm not certain that's right. But anyway, I will link all of their channels in the description below. They are all fantastic Black American booktubers. I definitely recommend that you go and check them out. They are just amazing, and it was a really interesting live show and I really enjoyed being part of it. When I say part of it, I just watched it as it happened and made a few comments in the little where you type the comments, but either way it was great, and I recommend you going and watching that because they do make some really interesting points about the books and about some of the controversy around those books. So I will link the live stream video in the description below, as well as all of their booktube channels. So those are the 5 books that I read. 5 books that I read during the month of June. And now I'm going to show you another book that I am in the middle of reading, which is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. So I'm in the middle of reading this book because I'm buddy reading this with my friend Alison, and we've been kind of a bit random with how we've been reading this because it depends on our schedules and everything. So I'm probably about just over halfway through it. I'm really, really enjoying it so far, and so is Alison. I don't want to go into a huge amount of detail because I'm not finished with it yet, but I definitely think it's a really interesting book. I love Erin Morgenstern's writing style. I think she has a really beautiful, lyrical, whimsical writing style, which I really enjoy. Yeah, I'll let you know when I'm done, which I'm hoping will be by the end of July. And Alice and I have some plans to do some more buddy reads as well, so I'll keep you up to date with that. Anyway guys, that is my June wrap up. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments about any of the books that I've read, did you go in the Blackout Buddy Read? What did you think of the books? Did you watch the live show? What did you think of that? I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. And in fact, any of the books that I talked about in this video, let me know what you're reading or you read for the month of June, what you're reading currently. That'd be awesome. All of my social media details are in the description below, so if you want to go and have a chat with me over there, then please do so. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. As I said, if you did, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time.